My name is Alara. For 15 years, I was the most powerful person in this country whose name you never knew. I am a ghostwriter of destinies. I spent my youth in the flickering light of a desk lamp, crafting the soaring rhetoric and the devastating punchlines that transformed my husband, Julian, and my father, Senator Vance, from mediocre men into political titans. I gave them their vision. I gave them their soul. I gave them the very words they used to convince millions of their integrity. I was the silent engine behind their landslide victory. But the moment the crown was secured, they decided the architect was an eyesore. Julian didn't want a partner who knew his every intellectual weakness. He wanted a trophy who wouldn't question his script. They threw me away like a spent pen, claiming I was nothing but a docile housewife. They forgot the most fundamental rule of power: never provoke the person who taught you how to speak, because the hand that writes the speech can also write the obituary of a career. The victory gala was a sea of champagne, silk, and the nauseating smell of unearned triumph. Julian stood on the podium, bathed in the golden glow of the spotlights, looking every bit the people's governor I had spent a decade inventing. My father stood beside him, beaming with the pride of a man who had successfully installed his puppet in the highest office in the state. "We stand at the dawn of a new era," Julian thundered, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "An era built on strength, on tradition, and on the unwavering values of the American family." The crowd roared. I sat at a small table in the far corner, tucked behind a floral arrangement, sipping lukewarm water. I had written that speech. I had labored over that unwavering values line for 3 nights, ensuring the cadence was perfect to mask the fact that Julian hadn't spent a single Sunday with his children in a year. As Julian descended from the stage, he didn't head toward me. He headed toward a woman named Celeste, a 24-year-old heiress to a tech fortune, dressed in a gown that looked like it was spun from liquid diamonds. He caught her hand, and for a fleeting second, his eyes met mine. There was no gratitude there, only a cold, clinical dismissal. 2 hours later, in the suffocating silence of our private library, the mask finally fell. "I've filed the papers, Alara," Julian said, not even looking up from his scotch. He tossed a thick legal envelope onto the desk where I had written his inaugural address just 48 hours prior. "Papers?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. "The election was 2 days ago, Julian. We're supposed to be planning the transition." "There is no 'we' in the transition," my father said, stepping out from the shadows of the bookshelf. He looked at me with the same disappointment he used to show when I got a B in political science. "You were a supportive wife and daughter, Alara," Julian interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "You did what women of your station do. You managed the home so the men could manage the world. But let's be honest, you have no stomach for the real arena. You're a housewife with a knack for grammar, nothing more. You have no charisma, no presence, and certainly no ambitions of your own. You're better off in the background, where you belong." "I am the reason people listen to you," I hissed, stepping toward him. "People listen to me because of how I look and how I sound," Julian countered, flashing that practiced shark-like grin. "Words are cheap, Alara. Anyone can hire a writer, and I've hired the best firm in D.C. for the next term. You're being compensated, of course. A quiet settlement, a house in the suburbs, and your silence. If you try to claim credit for my work, I'll have you buried in non-disclosure agreements before the sun comes up. Who would the public believe? The governor of the state, or a scorned ex-wife with a vivid imagination?" "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the fire raging in my chest. "The only mistake was keeping you this long," my father added, checking his watch. Now, pack your things. Celeste is moving in tomorrow. We need the house ready for the first televised interview of the new term." I walked out of that house with one suitcase and a digital backup of every draft, every voice memo, and every secret correspondence I had handled for them for 15 years. I didn't go to a lawyer. I didn't go to the press. I went to a small, nondescript apartment downtown and waited. I knew Julian. I knew he was a man of immense vanity and zero substance. I knew that without my hand on the rudder, his integrity would drift into the rocks of his own arrogance within weeks. The first month was a disaster for the administration. Julian's new DC firm wrote speeches that sounded like corporate brochures, sterile, hollow, and utterly devoid of the populist fire I used to inject into his veins. He fumbled his first press conference. He sounded defensive, elite, and disconnected. His ratings, which had peaked at 65% on election night, began to bleed out. My father tried to step in, but even his rhetoric was failing. He sounded like an artifact of a bygone era. The Thorne Vance brand was losing its luster. I spent those weeks in the library, but not writing for them. I was writing for a woman named Sarah Jenkins, a local grassroots leader who had the passion but lacked the polish. I met her in secret, shaping her voice, refining her message. I wasn't just her advisor, I was her architect. But as the special election for the vacant Senate seat approached, Sarah dropped out due to a family emergency. She sat in my living room, crying, apologizing. "There's no one else, Ilara," she sobbed. "No one can stand up to Julian and your father. They have the money, they have the machine." I looked at the television. Julian was giving a speech at a local high school. He looked lost. He was reading from a teleprompter like a child reading a textbook. He looked at the camera, and for a second his eyes met mine. There was no gratitude there, only a cold, clinical dismissal. "You're wrong, Sarah," I said, standing up. I walked to the mirror and wiped the exhaustion from my face. There is someone who knows exactly how that machine works. There is someone who knows every wire, every gear, and exactly which screw to pull to make the whole thing explode. "Who?" Sarah asked. "Me," I said. I didn't need a ghostwriter. I didn't need a script. I had the original blueprints. I filed my candidacy for the Senate seat at 5:49 p.m. on the final day of registration. The news cycle exploded. Ilara Torn, from housewife to challenger. Julian called me that night, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and genuine fear. "What are you doing, Ilara? You're making a fool of yourself. You've never been on a stage. We'll crush you." "Julian," I said, smiling at the phone, "I'm not the one who needs to worry about the stage. I'm the one who built it. I'll see you at the debates." I hung up. The ink was dry. The campaign had begun. And this time, I wasn't writing the story. I was the story. The campaign trail was a battlefield of perceptions, and I was the only soldier who had memorized the terrain of both camps. My father and Julian didn't just ignore my candidacy at first, they mocked it. They used their media connections to paint me as a scorned woman, a tragic figure of a domestic breakdown who was having a public midlife crisis. "Ilara is a wonderful mother," Julian told a crowd in a televised town hall, wearing his signature navy suit, the one I had picked for its trustworthy hue. "But the Senate is not a PTA meeting. It requires a level of steel, a level of strategic complexity that she simply hasn't been exposed to in our home. I wish her the best, truly. I hope she finds the peace she's looking for." I watched that clip in my campaign headquarters, a small, cramped office above a bakery. Sarah Jenkins sat beside me, her eyes flashing with anger. "They're treating you like a child, Ilara. The polls show them leading by 30 points. The donors are terrified to touch us because of your father's influence."
Let them lead, I said, my fingers dancing over my tablet as I deconstructed Julian's latest policy proposal. Look at his phrasing, Sarah. Strategic complexity, unwavering commitment. He's using the leftovers of the 2024 campaign. He's running out of things to say because I'm not there to say them for him. I didn't launch my campaign with expensive TV ads or glossy brochures. I launched it in the community centers, the diner booths, and the local schools. I didn't need a teleprompter. Every word I spoke was mine, unforced and raw. I didn't talk about national tradition. I talked about the crumbling infrastructure of our local schools, data I had gathered while Julian was at golf retreats. My first major rally was held in the very same gymnasium where Julian had accepted his first nomination. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and anticipation. I didn't walk out to a brass band or a light show. I walked out in a simple, sharp gray suit, stood at the microphone, and waited for the silence to become uncomfortable. For 15 years, I began, my voice clear and resonant, stripped of the supportive wife softness I had worn like a mask. For 15 years, I was the person who told you what Julian Thorne and Senator Vance believed. I was the person who shaped their promises. I was the hand that wrote the laws they took credit for. But tonight, I am not writing for them. I am speaking for you. The crowd was stunned. I spent the next 45 minutes dismantling their entire platform with the surgical precision of the person who had designed it. I pointed out the loopholes I had been forced to include in their tax bills. I explained the real reason the local hospital funding had been cut, a reason buried in a subclause I typed at 3 a.m. on my kitchen table. They tell you I am a housewife without ambition, and they are half right. I was a housewife. I saw the reality of your lives, while they saw the reality of their poll numbers. But as for ambition, my only ambition is to ensure that the men who stole your trust can no longer afford the words to buy it back. The rally didn't just make the local news, it went viral. By the next morning, my poll numbers had jumped 15 points. The housewife had become a hurricane. Julian's response was predictable: panic. He sent a team of private investigators to dig up dirt on me. They went through my bank records, my old college transcripts, even my medical files. But they found nothing. I hadn't been the one taking consultation fees from developers. I hadn't been the one with the secret apartment in the city. I was the one who kept the records of their secret apartments. That Friday, I received a courier-delivered letter. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was a handwritten note from my father. "Ilara, come home for dinner. Let's discuss this like a family. Don't throw away your reputation for a moment of spite." I didn't go for dinner. I went to the local TV station and accepted the invitation for the first televised debate. "I'll see you on stage, Father," I posted on my campaign's social media. "I've already set the table." The debate was set for the following Tuesday. Julian was reportedly locked in his office with 4 different speechwriters trying to find a way to sound authentic. But you can't buy authenticity from a firm in D.C., and you can't fake the truth when the person who knows it is standing 5 feet away. The night before the debate, Julian called me. His voice was no longer condescending. It was pleading. "Ilara, please, Celeste is pregnant. If you go on that stage and talk about the private accounts, it will destroy her. It will destroy everything we've built. Just pull out. I'll give you whatever you want. Millions, a position in the foundation. Just stop this." "You still think everything has a price," I said, looking at the draft of my opening statement. "That's why you lost. You thought my silence was part of the settlement. You forgot that I was the one who negotiated the settlement, and I never signed the non-disclosure." I hung up. The stage was set, the lights were warming up, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting in the wings with a notebook. I was the main event.
The debate stage was a cold, clinical arena of glass and high-intensity LED lights. I could feel the hum of the cameras, the collective breath of the millions watching from home, and the jagged, nervous energy radiating from the two podiums to my left. Julian looked impeccable in a charcoal suit, but his eyes were sunken, darting toward the teleprompter that wasn't there. My father, Senator Vance, leaned against his lectern with a practiced, grandfatherly gravitas that felt increasingly like a costume. "Tonight," the moderator began, "we discuss the future of the state's economic recovery. Governor Thorne, you've recently proposed the New Horizon initiative. Can you explain the core philosophy behind it?" Julian stepped forward, flashing a smile that used to melt voters' hearts. "The New Horizon is about legacy," he began, his voice dropping into that familiar, resonant baritone. "It's about the silent strength of the hard-working families who—" "Actually, Julian," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his rehearsed cadence like a laser, "the New Horizon was a draft I wrote for you back in 2022. If you recall, I abandoned that silent strength metaphor because it was a hollow platitude designed to mask the 4% cut to the small business subsidy. Are you still using the version where the footnote on page 12 explains the kickbacks for the steel developers, or did your new DC firm manage to hide the corruption more effectively?" The audience gasped. Julian's smile didn't just fade, it disintegrated. He looked at the moderator, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That is a baseless accusation," he stammered. "My wife, my ex-wife, is clearly confused by the complexities of legislative drafting." "I'm not confused, Julian," I said, leaning into my microphone, my gaze unwavering. "I'm the one who typed it, on our kitchen table, while you were strategizing on a yacht in the Virgin Islands with the very lobbyists who funded that bill. I have the original metadata on my personal laptop. Would you like the press to see the timestamp?" My father stepped in, trying to salvage the wreckage. "Lara, this is beneath you. A senator's seat requires a steady hand, not a personal vendetta. You're talking about drafts and metaphors. We are talking about the reality of governance." "Governance, father?" I turned to him, the man who had taught me that truth was just a variable in an equation of power. "Let's talk about reality. Let's talk about the Vance Foundation. For years, I wrote the speeches praising its charitable work, but 3 months ago, while I was packing my things from the house you threw me out of, I found a set of ledgers you'd accidentally left in the library. Ledgers that show the foundation isn't a charity. It's a laundering scheme for the offshore accounts you and Julian opened during the last election cycle." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. The moderators looked paralyzed. My father's face went from pale to a mottled, dangerous purple. "You signed those documents too, Lara," Julian hissed, his voice trembling with a desperate, cornered rage. "If we go down, you go down with us. You were the architect, remember?" "I was the writer, Julian," I said, a slow, sad smile touching my lips. "But I never signed the financial disclosures. I checked. You were so convinced I was just a docile housewife that you didn't even think I was worth the risk of a co-signature. You wanted all the credit for the wealth. Well, now you get all the credit for the crime." I didn't stop there. For the next hour, I performed a live autopsy of their careers. Every time they tried to use a populist slogan, I told the crowd exactly which focus group I had used to test it 10 years ago. Every time they tried to sound authentic, I pointed out the artificiality of their gestures I had coached them on in front of our bedroom mirror. I wasn't just winning a debate, I was deconstructing a lie. By the time the closing statements began, Julian was sweating through his expensive shirt. He looked small. He looked like the mediocre man I had first met in law school, the man who couldn't explain a basic tort without my help. My opponents say I am an amateur. They say I lack the status for this office, and they are right. I don't have the status of a man who sells his soul for a donor check. I don't have the status of a man who discards his family the moment they become inconvenient. But I have the words. I have the truth. And, as you've seen tonight, I am the only person on this stage who actually knows what's going on in this state, because for 15 years, I was the one keeping the lights on. I walked off the stage as the first poll results began to flash on the news monitors. My numbers hadn't just jumped, they had skyrocketed. Julian and my father were in a free fall. But as I reached my dressing room, Sarah Jenkins was waiting for me, her face pale as she held up her phone. "Ilara, Julian's team, they've just leaked a video. It's from the night you left. It's edited to look like you're threatening to destroy the state's economy if he doesn't pay you off. It's a deepfake, but it's good. The internet is already tearing it apart." I looked at the video. It was a crude, desperate attempt to turn me into a blackmailer. "They're playing their last card, Sarah," I said, my heart cold but calm. "They think they can use technology to rewrite the narrative. They forgot that I'm the one who knows how to tell a story that people actually believe. What are we going to do?" "We aren't going to do anything," I said, picking up my coat. "I'm going to make one more call, to the woman Julian replaced me with, to Celeste." "Celeste? Why her?" "Because," I said, walking toward the door, "because she's the only one who knows the password to the Aegis server, and unlike my husband, I know exactly what a woman like her needs to hear to flip the script."
The digital smear campaign was a wildfire, fueled by the desperate billions of my father's donors. The deepfake video of me supposedly blackmailing Julian was playing on every news cycle. A grainy, distorted version of a woman I didn't recognize. But in the age of information, the only thing more powerful than a lie is the person who knows where the original recording is kept. I met Celeste in a dimly lit corner of a silent library, the kind of place Julian and my father never visited because there were no cameras there. She looked exhausted, her expensive silk dress wrinkled, her eyes wide with the realization that she was just the latest prop in a play that was quickly turning into a tragedy. "He's going to leave you too, Celeste," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The moment you become a liability, the moment that baby is born and you aren't the shiny new asset anymore, he'll find a younger heiress. He doesn't love you. He loves the optics of you." "I have the raw files," she whispered, her hands trembling as she slid a small encrypted drive across the table. "He left his laptop open after the debate. He was drinking. He was screaming at your father. I heard them talking about the Aegis server. I saw the original footage they used to make that fake." "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because," she said, a spark of genuine fire appearing in her eyes, "I don't want my child to grow up in a world where a man like Julian Thorne is the hero of the story. And because I've read your speeches, Ilara. I know you're the only one who can actually lead." I took the drive. The final piece of the puzzle was in my hand. Election night was an electric, suffocating storm. The state was divided, the polls deadlocked. Julian had scheduled a victory rally at the downtown arena, complete with falling confetti and $1,000-a-plate dinner. I was in a small community hall surrounded by Sarah Jenkins and a few dozen volunteers who had worked for free. At 9 p.m., the news broke. Not the election results, but the Vesper leak. I had released the raw footage of the deep fake creation alongside the unedited ledgers of the Vance Foundation. It wasn't just proof of my innocence, it was a high-definition recording of Julian and my father laughing about crushing the housewife while they transferred funds to an offshore account in the Caymans. The shift in the room was physical. The television screens at Julian's rally showed a crowd that had suddenly gone silent. People were walking out. The confetti was falling on an empty floor. By midnight, the race was called. Elara Thorne, Senator-elect. I didn't wait for Julian to call. I walked into his victory rally while he was still backstage, trying to draft a concession speech that his DC writers were too panicked to finish. The security guards, men who had seen me bring Julian coffee for a decade, simply stepped aside and let me pass. I walked into the green room. Julian was slumped in a chair, his tie undone, staring at a blank teleprompter. My father was on the phone screaming at a lawyer who had already hung up. "You need a speech, Julian?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up at me, and for the first time in 15 years, he looked truly, utterly silenced. "Laura, I don't know what to say. They're saying there's an arrest warrant. The foundation." "You say the truth," I said, walking to the computer and typing 3 short paragraphs. "For the first time in your life, you're going to read words that are actually yours, because I'm done writing your soul for you." I walked onto the main stage of his rally. The cameras turned toward me. The few remaining supporters looked at me with a mix of awe and fear. "Tonight," I began, and my voice felt like it could shatter the glass walls of the arena, "we have closed the book on a dynasty built on shadows. For years, I sat in the dark and gave my voice to men who didn't deserve to be heard. I let them believe that power is something you take, something you buy, something you steal from the people you claim to love." I paused, looking directly into the lens of the primary camera. But power isn't a script, it's not a suit, and it's certainly not a name. Power is the truth that remains when all the lies are stripped away. To my ex-husband and my father, you called me a housewife without ambition. You were right. I didn't have the ambition to be a fraud. I had the ambition to be the person who finally turned the lights on. The roar of the crowd in the community hall across town could be heard even here. Julian walked out onto the stage a few minutes later. He looked broken. He read the 3 paragraphs I had written, a full, unvarnished confession of his financial crimes and his role in the smear campaign. He was arrested by state troopers before he could even finish the last sentence. My father followed him in handcuffs an hour later. I stood on the balcony of the Capitol building the next morning, watching the sun rise over a state that was finally mine to help heal. Sarah Jenkins stood beside me, holding a stack of new bills, with real solutions. "What's the first thing on the agenda, Senator?" she asked. I looked at the blank page in front of me. For the first time, I wasn't writing for a man's ego. I wasn't hiding in a library. I was standing in the light, and every word I wrote was going to be signed with my own name. "The first thing," I said, picking up my pen, "is to tell the people the truth, every single word of it. My name is Elara. I am no longer the voice from the shadows. I am the woman who writes the future. And this time, I'm not using a ghostwriter."